Hello and welcome to our UCS Tech Talk on UCS Performance Manager. My name is Jeff Foster. I'll be the moderator for this Tech Talk. I've got a panel of experts joining me this morning. Let's go ahead and introduce the experts. Vish, go ahead.
Hey guys, I'm Jakka, Product Manager in the UCS team, focusing on systems management around UCS.
Kent.
Hello everyone, this is Kent Erickson. I'm with Zenoss and I'm a product manager.
And Eric.
Hello, my name is Eric Williams. I'm a technical marketing engineer for Cisco. I'm one of our systems management, monitoring, and automation subject matter experts at Cisco.
And again, my name is Jeff Foster. I'm a technical marketing engineer, and I'll be your host for the session this morning. So let's get this started with Vish. We're here to talk about a new offering called UCS Performance Manager. So it'd be great if you can give us a quick overview of what is UCS Performance Manager for those folks who haven't heard of this product yet.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thank you. So UCS Performance Manager is a new product in our UCS software portfolio. This is a tool for health and device monitoring, performance monitoring, capacity planning of UCS and UCS-centric integrated infrastructure. Today, many customers use various tools, but they are disjointed and they are looking for solutions that they can use for UCS that provides additional details in terms of device and health, in terms of visibility into individual components in the system, and tie the performance of the applications to the performance of the underlying physical and virtual infrastructure. So it will also have capacity planning capabilities going on for the whole integrated stack.
And what are some of the challenges faced by data center administrators today?
Absolutely. So, as you know, UCS has been in the market for 5 years. So some of the common questions we get from our customers is about better visibility into UCS and questions about enabling the customers to fully exploit the capabilities with the technologies the customers have invested on. So they are not able to, some of the issues they see is that they're not able to see the various components in the system, the virtualization, resource utilization, bandwidth utilization, and so on. And they want to get that visibility, one, and second thing is they want to fully leverage and exploit the capabilities that are exposed by these individual technologies. The other thing is that there are multiple point products that focus on compute, network, storage, etc. Customers are looking for solutions that will correlate information from across the board and be able to take actionable steps on their data, on their infrastructure to enable better levels of service to their end customers.
Good.
So sorry, go ahead.
There's a number of other products out there that have similar capabilities or address the market in much the same way or address these issues. So how does UCS Performance Manager provide UCS customers more insight into their infrastructure and data center?
That's a good question, Jeff. So some of the things that our customers, the few early customers that we showed UCSPM to, what they like is that they get a deeper, fuller visibility into individual components of UCS and also the individual components of the integrated infrastructure components. So UCS Performance Manager does not treat UCS like any other x86 platform. So what that means is that they should just show the faults and events from UCS and at just the server level, and not showing information in terms of fabric interconnects, the extenders, the chassis, and the connections that are there between multiple components within UCS. And also, they do not correlate the UCS related information with the information that the tools are getting from other components within the integrated stack. So UCSPM provides detailed inventory information, resource and bandwidth utilization information, and all that will be correlated with all the components within the integrated stack. So we highlight the differentiation that we bring to that we brought to the industry 5 years ago. The service profiles, the virtual interface cards, the virtual interfaces, and the bandwidth and the resource sharing that happens between multiple servers. All those will be fully highlighted with UCS Performance Manager. This will enable our customers to fully exploit the capabilities. We have detailed information about all the individual components and across the board, going not only within the system but also going to the network and storage components from a SAN uplink perspective, LAN uplink perspective, directly attached storage, and so on.
And what are some of the key features or key activities that customers are going to utilize or come in contact with UCS Performance Manager on a daily basis?
Yeah. So some of the things that we have heard from our customers so far with early customers is the fact that we provide consolidated inventory information for across the board, consolidated health information in terms of faults, events, status of the various components, be it physical or virtual components in the infrastructure, and provide comprehensive reports and tools and views to help customers take the appropriate action. So we do performance monitoring. This will help customers in identifying any issues, identify any bottlenecks, and proactively look at any bottlenecks that are developing based on trends and graphs. And from an integrated infrastructure perspective, we provide dynamic views that provide an end-to-end map, end-to-end view of the operating system and the underlying physical and virtual infrastructure.
Great. So now that we've framed at a very high level what is UCS Performance Manager and talked a little bit about some of the challenges that data center admins face on a daily basis, let's double click now into the product. So how is this product going to be packaged and what UCS servers are going to be supported?
Yeah. So UCS Performance Manager is a virtual appliance. So customers can install it on an hypervisor of choice. We are starting off with support on ESX and Hyper-V. So they can insert, I'd say, OVA or ISO format. They can install it, roll it out in a fairly short period of time. It's a customized packaged product that we have developed working with Zenoss. So customers don't have to worry about multiple person deployment and configuration exercise. The design, it's designed to be deployable and configurable in a matter of hours. So we'll have this product we'll offer this product in two versions. One is the integrated infrastructure version. It's a full version that will support the entire integrated infrastructure stack, and the other one is the express version for some of our customers who want to try it out to better understand UCS. So the express version will only support UCS, a full coverage of the fabric interconnect, all the servers, the chassis, IO modules, and so on. And the product is licensed per server. When I say server, it's the per physical UCS server. So all the connected network and storage devices are covered as part of the server license. So the other question you had was about the servers we support. We support all servers, as in blade servers and UCS blade servers, UCS rack servers, as long as they are managed by UCS Manager with a pair of fabric interconnects. So today we are not supporting standalone C-series servers, standalone rack servers, or the E-series servers, but we support all servers that are managed by fabric interconnects through UCS Manager.
Thanks. So you mentioned one thing that caught my ear is you mentioned this integrated infrastructure version. It sounds like it's a full suite of capabilities. Can you define or explain a little bit more of what is included in the integrated infrastructure version?
Absolutely. So integrated infrastructure, as as many people are familiar, so we have these reference architectures or pre-packaged bundles of infrastructure, be it VC vBlock or FlexPod or vSpecs architecture or custom architectures built on the same building blocks, that is Cisco UCS and Cisco networking gear, MDS, and also supported storage vendors like EMC and NetApp. And on top of that, we'll support hypervisors as well to cover the physical and virtual infrastructure that's part of an integrated infrastructure. In terms of network, we'll be supporting Cisco network devices, Nexus, Catalyst, and MDS switches. And in terms of storage, we are starting off, as I mentioned, in terms of the integrated architectures, the vBlock and vSpecs. So with what that means is that we will be supporting EMC arrays and NetApp filers. With EMC, we will be supporting VNX and VMAX, and with NetApp filers, we are supporting both cluster mode and 7 mode filers. So on the hypervisor side, we are starting with ESX and Hyper-V support, and we'll be supporting operating systems that are running on top, either be it they are bare metal or running on hypervisors in a virtual machine. So both flavors of Windows and Linux will be supported as part of the integrated infrastructure coverage.
Perfect. Now, I know that many of the customers that I talk to have a variety of tools inside their environment already for service management, monitoring, and other tools. So will UCS Performance Manager be able to integrate with some of the other existing tools that customers may have in their data centers?
That's a great question, Jeff. So as I mentioned, some of our customers have been with UCS for a long period of time. And in a long-standing data center, they have a number of management, monitoring, ticketing, servicing tools already in place, and they will be able to integrate, or UCS Performance Manager will be able to integrate with those other monitoring and management tools by various mechanisms. We have a number of triggers and notification methods that Eric and Kent will touch upon later on in terms of details. We have a number of capabilities in terms of sending out emails or sending a page message or making a syslog entry or sending out SNMP traps. And also there are APIs that customers can program into to have a integrated mechanism between UCS Performance Manager and other management and ticketing tools that are out there in the data center today.
Perfect. Thanks for the overview, Vish. That really helps to frame the product, a little bit about it, and the packaging. So you mentioned actually Kent and Eric. So I want to actually shift gears now, and Kent, let's go ahead and jump into the weeds a bit and dive down into the product. Could you spend a few minutes and explain the architecture of UCS Performance Manager for the audience?
Sure, and I'm going to share out a slide here that'll do exactly that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about UCS Performance Manager and how it's built and what some of the major components are within it. As Vish mentioned, one of the things that we were trying to focus on was making this something that would install very, very easily. And so that kind of gray rectangle in the middle is a single VM. Typically, it runs on CentOS 6 64-bit that comes in the package that's installed there, and various sizes that produce various scales. The maximum scale, by the way, for a UCS Performance Manager here in this version 1 is 5 fully populated domains and the integrated infrastructure devices that are supporting that. Inside of that single VM, there are a number of pre-configured components. There's a web server that supports the browser interfaces. I'll come back to the browser in just a second. There's a collector down at the bottom that reaches out to all of the UCS, the storage, the networking devices, the operating systems, the VMs, and collects data. It does that without deploying any agents. We use a lot of web-friendly protocols in order to do that. I'll come back and talk a little bit more about those when I actually do an installation in a couple of minutes. The collector stores the information that comes back, the performance information in a performance database. We also collect back the inventory information that Vish talked about. We call that the model, and we put that and the events in another data store. Both of those data stores are installed inside the same VM. They come pre-configured, ready to use, and all you have to do is discover the devices, and they immediately have thresholds that are monitoring and everything's set up and ready to go. All right, let me touch on the browser for just a second, because nearly everything you do with UCS Performance Manager is through a browser, and all of the major browsers are supported. Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari, all of them work very, very well. We'll see a little bit of that. We'll do a lot of work in the browser interface a little bit later. Now, the browser interface talks to the web server using a JSON protocol, which means that it's available for certain scripting activities as well, which is something a lot of our customers have found useful. Now, Jeff, you asked Vish a question about exiting out and how do I get out to some of the existing systems that people have. And the two that I really want to touch on right now are service desks and manager of managers. Service desks, of course, are ticketing systems, and a lot of service desks have the ability to catch a richly configured email and create a ticket directly from that. Most of them also can take an SNMP trap and create a ticket from that. Of course, SNMP traps are a little bit smaller, so with a service desk, you prefer to use an email interface. With a manager of managers, they're all configured to accept SNMP data, and we can send SNMP traps. And of course, we can also run a Linux script and do practically any kind of communication to any kind of device we want, straight out of the hub. So that's a little bit of how this is packaged and how it works. And Jeff, I'd like to hand it back to you now.
Oh, thanks, Ken. So I got a couple of follow-up questions. So when it comes to using some of the data from UCS Performance Manager and other tools, what are some of the, how would we work with things like events and triggers or thresholds in UCS Performance Manager and tying those to other management tools?
Okay, yeah, this is a little bit more detail on that rightward arrow that came out of my VM a little bit. You don't have to send everything from UCS Performance Manager off to another system. You can go in and do very precise selection of data. You can select it by device, you can select it by event severity, you can select it by the type of problem that it is. You can do deep substrings and make very, very precise matches. You can make it run at various times a day, and you can send some data to your manager of managers and other data to your service desk. So there's a very precise facility called a trigger. It's kind of like a database trigger. So think about a database trigger. You're doing a select statement with a bunch of qualifiers. That's very similar to what our trigger is. And then you tie that trigger to a notification, to a trap, to an email, to a syslog, to an old-fashioned page if you want some out-of-band notification, or to a command that's running and has access to all of the data that's in there.
Okay, perfect. That's some great information there. One final question for you, and that is, how does a customer deal with data retention? How does the system deal with data retention?
Oh, great question. Thanks for reminding me to cover that. The system keeps a year's worth of performance data at full resolution in its default, and we figure that's an awful lot of data for most people, and that's all pre-configured, by the way, as well. All the space gets predefined when you first add the devices in. The event data, the model data is accurate as of right now, and it is kept that way. And the event data, by default, we're keeping 90 days. Customers can change that. All right.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you for the update and the out-of-box information. That's great information. So let me flip over, Eric. We haven't talked to you yet this morning.
Good morning.
So what are some of the pitfalls that customers run into when managing capacity in a UCS domain?
So a couple things. If you look at UCS, we designed everything with UCS with flexibility in mind, meaning we allowed the user to be able to configure and cable UCS based upon their requirements. And with that flexibility, the problem becomes when you start doing all this configuration and you do this initial design, your design may not end up matching what ends up becoming what reality becomes. Meaning, I said, well, maybe for this particular application, I estimated I needed a particular amount of bandwidth, and maybe I configured X number of LAN ports to go uplink out of the fabric interconnects, and maybe I only used 1 or 2 uplinks from a particular chassis to the fabric interconnect. And after we've actually run up the environment into production, I realized that I underconfigured this particular environment. And the questions we get from customers are, how do I know when to change that design when I've made a mistake or underconfigured, basically had an environment that's going to be very congested, and be able to change that and to know when to change that configuration to really match my capacity that I'm using. And so that's a question I get a lot from customers. How do I know, when do I know best when to add uplinks or potentially remove uplinks? I'm actually have too many uplinks configured for the amount of capacity I'm using. And so some of the problems with that is, with UCS Manager, since that management software sits inside of the Fabric Interconnect, there's not a lot of storage space there to be able to store a lot of long-term metrics. So there's no way to be able to mine that data right into the UCS Manager UI. You can only save a few hours or days of information right at that endpoint. And so, really, we need to have a way to be able to take all of those metrics that we're gathering from UCS and put it into something else that will allow an end user to be able to make better decisions and give better visibility across a much longer period of time for their environment. And so those areas that you want to drill into from a customer perspective usually reside around a couple of areas. It resides around your Fabric Interconnect and how you've configured your, the right balance of SAN uplinks versus LAN uplinks. When should I add more LAN or SAN uplinks? When should I potentially remove them? And then how do I best monitor the balance of things like my port channels? If I'm doing something like disjoint layer 2, how do I know when I may need to add another port to that particular port channel to increase capacity for bandwidth? And then secondly, we look at things like our chassis and such. That's another area that could be a potential point of congestion, where I have my the number of uplinks. When I cable that chassis for bandwidth, maybe I didn't cable it with enough bandwidth in mind, and my application has really overgrown the configuration. So when do I know? When do I make that decision to go from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8 uplinks per IOM for both the IOMs that are in the chassis themselves, as well as your uplinks from the FEXs that connect your rack mount servers that are managed by UCS. Secondly, people have a lot of questions about how do I understand about the proper way to balance the A side and B side fabric. When do I, how can I see where I may have out of balance problems where maybe I'm put too much traffic on my side A versus side B, and I may need to change the configuration to do a better balancing job between fabric A and fabric B. And then lastly, when do I how can I look down at that server level or that VM level to really figure out what are the chatty Cathys in my environment? Do I have a blade that's taking more bandwidth than it really needs, or do I have 4 or 5 systems that are on one chassis where they're just basically beating against each other to take the bandwidth? And should I maybe figure out ways to rebalance my environment to do a better job of having my network balanced across the different environments?
So that's a great overview of UCS and some of the challenges that customers are facing today. Now, can you take that one step further and explain to our viewers how UCS Performance Manager is going to address these specific problems?
So, as Vish and Kent were saying, the great part about UCSPM is it really fully discovers and monitors that into UCS domain in its entirety. And when I say it in its entirety, it monitors both the hardware configuration, those things like our fabric interconnects, the effects, the I/O modules, the chassis blades, the rack mount servers, as well as the adapters. It monitors, it inventories, and manages all of those elements, as well as it monitors the logical side. And going back to what Vish was saying, where many of our many other tools really focus only on the net hardware, and they have either a network-centric point of view or a server administrator point of view, but not both. I mean, with a converged infrastructure like UCS, you have an environment where you have a network guy and a storage guy and a server guy really wanting to take the metrics that are provided in UCS and use them in a multitude of different ways. But I need to have an understanding of how that hardware configuration applies to the logical configuration that I have. So logical being the service profiles that you've created. How do I have things balanced across my environment? Can I do a better job of potentially moving one or two service profiles from one chassis, move it to another to do a better balance to make sure all of my my chassis are equally utilized? There's not a hotspot in my environment. Secondly, from a network guy's perspective, you have things like port channeling. When do I know when I need to potentially add more uplinks or remove uplinks for a particular channel? Because I may be not utilizing very much of that bandwidth, so I could potentially right-size my environment a bit with that. And the great part about with UCS Performance Manager, it's doing all of those, it's monitoring and modeling all of that entire infrastructure directly into the user interface, so you can see exactly the health at a lot of different levels, at the macro level to the very micro level. I can look at it at a total SAN utilization in my network. I can drill down into what fabric is actually utilizing the SAN. A side, B more utilized in the B, and etc. And then start drilling that down into the actual. What's my utilization from LAN versus SAN at the chassis level, and all the way down to the blade level. And then it does all of that, modeling and correlation with the service profile. So I can really go and look at a service profile that's running on a server and really understand, how things are mapped and be able to have a better understanding there and get the context as a service profile moves from one blade to another blade. That kind of data will be well understood, and that we can center around that logical configuration.
Thanks, Eric. That's a great explanation of how we can address some of the challenges that customers are facing. Now, one question that I get all the time around new tool sets is, help me get going very quickly. So Kent, can you tell me a little bit more about some of the pre-configured metrics that are available out of the box to help customers get up and running with Performance Manager quickly and effectively?
Sure, absolutely. They are all built in and are standard out of the box, so that all you need to do to get them going is to install the product. Now, Eric was just talking about identifying out of balance conditions, and that's one of the places where we've built in some very, very interesting metrics in the system, because we have to be able to compare across a port channel or something that is kind of like a port channel, like down to a chassis. We've got the I/O module A and the I/O module B, and we want to know that the utilization is not out of balance between those. And so we have some special metrics that can calculate that out of balance condition automatically. It's not just am I running a temperature, it's am I out of balance and am I crooked, and I've got to do one of those configuration fixes that Eric is talking about. So we've got the standard thresholds built in, and we've got these special out of balance metrics built in.
Oh, great. Now, you've been talking about it, and I'd love to see it. Do you have a demo or anything that you can share with the audience here on Performance Manager?
Sure. What I'd like to do is do a quick installation and walk through an installation. Then I'm going to pause it for 18 hours. I hope everybody can hang on. No, I've pre-recorded it, so we won't have to pause it for 18 hours. And we'll take a look at what the system actually does. And I'm going to focus first on UCS, just on UCS, and we'll drill in there. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, let me share out my application then. All right, so I'm going to do an installation, and after you've started the VM, started the appliance in the VM, the very first screen you'll see when you go into the browser is this getting started screen. It's a 1, 2, 3 process. And the first thing you do is set up a couple of application user accounts, and this is the UCS Performance Manager administration account. It's not the root account for the console. And then we set up a user account. And one of the things we set up on the user account is some notification information. So we know if we do want to set up some notification where that email ought to go. Next thing we do is add a product key. And for some reason, we decided to black that all out. Okay. And then we add a UCS domain. And to add a UCS domain, all you need to know is the management IP address for the UCS domain and have some view-only credentials into that domain. As soon as you enter those, it is tested, and you can see that it says connection valid success up there, and that means that UCS system was found and the credentials were tested and it's starting to model. So now we've got. So that's all it takes to add a UCS domain. It's like 3 fields in 30 seconds here. But we've got a bunch of other things that we need to add. We've got storage devices and network devices and some operating systems that we want to run and some hypervisors. So let's add those too at the same time, as long as we're here in the startup part. So we'll go next. And the first thing I'm going to add is we've made this very simple so that you can come in and pick exactly what network, storage, server, hypervisors you want. We're going to add a couple of Nexus 5000s. And if you've got multiple devices that are all the same, you can just add them all in the box there if they all share the credentials. And down at the bottom, it starts running and adding them. It's running them in a background job, but it's reporting what the status is back here. So we've added our 2 Nexus devices very, very quickly. By the way, the Nexus device, we just used SNMP to add it. We could also have typed in the netconf credentials and picked up a couple more pieces of information. Netconf really fills that in. All right, now storage devices. So storage devices that are supported are those that are supported in the integrated infrastructures that Vish talked about, the FlexPod, the vSpecs, and the vBlock. And so that's NetApp and EMC, depending on which one we're looking at. And there's a couple ways to talk to each of these. When we're talking to NetApp, we can talk using the old SNMP protocol, or we can use the modern ONTAP protocol, which is an SSH connection off to that. The great advantage of the ONTAP is I can support 7-mode and C-mode filers, and we're going to add a 7-mode filer, both sides of it, in just a second. When we're talking to an EMC device that says their SMIS proxy, what is that? Well, there's a component called the EMC Solution Enabler that EMC provides for at no charge to its customers, and that is the Storage Management Industry specification. It's a standard way of accessing storage devices across multiple arrays, and so you need to get their SMIS proxy, the Solution Enabler, and install it. It installs either on a Linux server or a Windows server, a VM typically, and it'll support multiple arrays, all of the same sites. So one SMIS proxy for all of the VNXs, one SMIS proxy for all of the VMAXs. But what I said was that we were going to add a 7-mode filer, and so we're going to add both the A and B side for that. And we'll use the credentials that we set up in the ONTAP Credential Manager. And we're going out and collecting the configuration information from that device, and it spins for a couple seconds, and now that's done. Now we've got some servers, some workloads they're adding. And we add both Linux and Windows, and both for virtualized and non-virtualized workloads. You know, from the operating system, you can't really tell, so we don't really tell. And there's a couple of protocol choices here, SNMP and SSH and WinRM. So Linux server, I'm going to add it with SNMP here, and I'm going to add a couple of them. One of the things I really like to do is cut and paste a long list of addresses into this box so that I can add a dozen or 100 of these all at once. And they're spinning up and adding there. Okay, and let's add our Windows server, and we're going to add the Windows server using the SNMP. Now, a lot of you won't have SNMP enabled on your Windows servers and might want to use the WinRM protocol. I'll talk about that in just a second. But here we've got our Windows servers that happen to be running SNMP, so we'll pull that in. All right, that pops for a couple seconds and that goes. Now, the last thing that we want to add is the hypervisors. Okay, there's two hypervisors supported in this first version. One is vSphere, and we talk to the vCenter server. So one connection from UCS Performance Manager gets us all of the hosts, all of the VMs, all of the data stores, everything from that environment with one set of connections. On a Hyper-V, that's where we do need to talk that WinRM protocol. WinRM is a new protocol from Microsoft. Basically what it is, it's some web-friendly wrappers around the old WMI protocol. And in order to set up WinRM, you can set that up either as a local account or as a domain account. And if you set up as a domain account, you need to go into group policy and let that account have remote management access, remote shell access, and of course let the contents go through the firewall. Here we're going to add a vSphere though. Okay, so we key in a name for that, give it the connection IP address for it, and some appropriate credentials that you can set up over in vCenter. And again, that just takes a few seconds to add that. Now, at this point, Jeff, you asked about what does it take to configure this. We're actually done configuring the system. We've added the devices and we're ready to take a look at it. And if we drop in, it'll immediately, when it finishes that 1, 2, 3, it'll drop us into that system and we'll see the dashboard right here. And there's a little bit we can see. We've got the one UCS that's there under the domain overview portlet and the currently monitoring one UCS domains, and we see the chassis that were discovered. And if we drill in over at the infrastructure tab, we'll see all of the devices that were added, that we just added. The UCS system, our two Nexus 5000s, the 4 servers that we added, the storage array that we NetApp storage array that we added, and the vCenter that we added. Now, what I've done here, that was the 18-hour pause that you just saw, and I wanted to have an 18-hour pause in there so that we'd have had plenty of time to collect a lot of performance data so that we could look at some graphs and see some data. First thing that I wanted to show you is the topology view. The topology view is part of the inventory information we collect. And not only do we collect a list of all of the components, but all of the relationships and all the connections between each of those. And here's a nice diagram to show you how that works. But it's more than just a nice diagram. We can click on any of these lines or any of these components. So let's click into the Fabric Interconnect and immediately start seeing some things. So CPU and memory utilization of the switch itself. We can also look at the fabric utilization. Here we're looking at it in bits, which is nice. We're running what, 5 3/4 on the receive and 7 on transmit. We can look and see how much remaining capacity is. There's a ton of extra capacity on this domain. We can add more blades and more chassis for quite a while before we run out of capacity on the Fabric Interconnect. And then we've got some information about what's going up northbound, what's going upbound on the LAN, what's going upbound on the SAN. If I had any direct storage attached device, what am I using there? What does my total northbound utilization look like for LAN and SAN? So I can tell where my bandwidth is being used. Okay. All right, and I can see the total percentage of LAN uplink. Eric was talking about, do I have enough LAN uplinks going on right now? And I can see clearly here that I do. I'm using, just a few percent, so I can add a lot more workload, or maybe I don't need all those LAN uplinks configured right now. I can do the same thing for the SAN uplinks. We're using a bit more right there, and same thing downstream for the server ports. Again, lots of capacity available on this domain, 3, 4, 5%. Down below, we see the individual components that are in this domain and their current utilization. So we see transmit and receive for the 2 chassis, the couple of directly connected servers, and the whatever is connected behind that FEX. We'd see that. So we're able to drill into that Fabric Interconnect component and see what's going on. Okay, so I mentioned we can drill into any of the lines. Let's drill into one of those northbound links. So this northbound link is from switch A up to my LAN cloud, just the general cloud. And down on the bottom, I can see I have 40 gigabits, 4 ports that are providing that capacity up there. And that's probably why I have so much capacity available. I'm just using a few percent, and there's lots and lots of available space. And this is the bits per second view of that capacity. If there were any events that were appropriate for these, some of those built-in thresholds that we were talking about, Jeff, they would pop up here on this system. Now, we show not only threshold events, but we also show fault events. So let me drill into one of the chassis. Then you can see that it has some fault events there. And I get the same kind of information for the chassis. Total utilization for the chassis, how much is going out of the A I/O module, how much is going out of the B I/O module. Down below, all of the individual ports, and then here the individual events that pop up. And there's both some informational events, some states that have changed, as well as an ether VIF event that maybe I want to drill into. So I can double click on that, and it pops up all the details for that event. Now, this is the information that I can send over, Jeff, to the to my service desk or to my manager of managers, or get it in my email. And it even includes UCS fault information that's helpful for a UCS administrator in figuring out exactly what the problem is. The same information that you might see if you were to look over in a UCS manager. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to a system that's quite a bit more populated. It's got six domains, and it's got a lot of other devices in it, but I'm really going to focus in and drill in and explore all of the different kind of usage scenarios that Eric was talking about what is my highest used server, and etc. So let's take a look at that. And again, we're looking at the dashboard here. By the way, there's an individual dashboard for each user account, so I can set up my own account. And the first thing I'm going to do here, because I want to find the busiest server, well, the first thing I'm going to do is look at a couple of my domains and see which are the busiest chassis. Okay, so I'm looking at that domain. That's pretty easy to see. So let's go in and add the server capacity view and find out what my busiest server is. And I'm looking at my .10 domain, but what I really want to do is right now I want to look at this .106 domain. There's quite a few chassis and blades in that, so let's go and sort that descending, and I can find right away that chassis 2 blade 7 is my biggest hog right now. It's transmitting at 7 gigabits per second. Not a lot in terms of the overall capacity, but that's what it's doing. Here's what the system looks like when there are multiple domains installed. So I've got a topology view for my .10 domain. I've got a different topology view, and I can go drill in and look at the SAN cloud for that and see what the utilization is for the fiber channel ports. It's not just Ethernet, of course, in the unified fabric. Okay, or I can look at my 106 domain, and my 106 domain has a couple of chassis and several different rack servers that are directly connected into it. But if I wanted to drill into this domain and look at it very carefully, I can get this detail view. And this detail view does a couple things. First of all, I'm going to drill in and spend some time looking at bandwidth usage, because that's what I really care about most often with this product, is where is the bandwidth being used and how is it being used. But down the left, you see all the components, all the inventory information that Eric and Vish talked about that we're pulling out. All of that is pulled out by default immediately when you first get in the system. And we'll look at a couple of those a little bit later on. All right, so this Bandwidth Explorer lets me look at the SAN cloud, drill down into how much is being used on one switch, or look at the individual ports and see what the utilization is on port 32 and on port 31. So I can look at it at an aggregated level at the SAN cloud, but the way that aggregation comes is from the ports themselves. I can also identify immediately who's the biggest consumer, identify whether that's normal or whether that's changed recently. Okay. All right, now I can also look at the LAN cloud and get the same type of information out of that. Okay, the cloud, the LAN, the total northbound uplink, what's coming out of switch A, and the individual ports from that. See the utilization across each of those. Okay, or I can look at one of my switches, and I see the network components of that switch here. I see the downstream to the I/O modules and the ports that are connecting to that. I look at it at the whole chassis level, or drill down and look at it at one I/O module or the other one, or the individual ports that are in that. So we've got these multiple levels of aggregation that let me really see what's going on. Now, of course, a chassis has not just network components but server components as well. And so if I switch over to the group by server view, that's when I can look at the utilization for the chassis as a whole, or by the individual servers within it. So I have that ability to pivot from the network view to the server view and look at it different ways. Now, I said I wanted to drill in and look at some of this detailed information here on the left on the individual components, and we'll look at several of these. I'm going to start off by looking at that chassis, and I can see my chassis graphs. I'm looking at chassis 2. Let's identify what blade servers are in that chassis. 2 of them. There's one in slot 7 and one in slot 8. If I look at chassis 1, there's half a dozen that are in this chassis, and I can see that some of them are currently associated with service profiles if I look all the way over to the right. Now I might want to look at the virtual HBAs, so something completely different. A virtual component instead of that's associated with a service profile rather than a physical component like a chassis or blade. So here I'm looking at a particular service profile over on the right on the top. It's UCSPM Win1, that Windows server that I added, and I can see the VHBA utilization on fiber channel 0, or I can look, it's got 2 of those, so I picked that up on fiber channel, the other one. All right, so by the way, all of this information, again, Jeff, is completely standard. Just by discovering all of those devices, this pops up and I see it. So I don't have any configuration to do it. It's kind of nice to be able to set something up and go out to lunch and come back and start finding out really interesting stuff. Okay, so we can also get the same kind of information for the virtual NICs and look at the VNICs that are associated with a service profile. All right, now, we talked a little bit about those we didn't talk about aggregation pools. We talked about port channels. But inside of a UCS, there are a lot of things that are kind of like port channels and kind of bigger than port channels. Like here we're looking at all of the links from this domain to a SAN. So that's links across both of the fabric interconnects. That's not a port channel when it's across 2 fabric interconnects. And so that here we can see the members of those fabric uplinks. And it happens to be port 31 and 32 on both of those. And we can click and look at the individual utilization of the fiber channel supports that are supporting that SAN uplink and see how much utilization is going on right now on each of those and what it's been doing recently. Now, looking at another one of the aggregation pools, this is the total links from switch A to the outside LAN. Okay, here's switch B to the outside LAN. So each of those would have I've got the individuals and I can look at them collectively. Okay, if I'm looking at a server port, I can get the links from the server from switch B to chassis 1 or chassis 2, or I can go in and look at a service profile and jump immediately over that virtual capacity and see the overall service profile utilization. One of the great things about grabbing service profile utilization as opposed to grabbing blade utilization is blade utilization tells me what's going on with the service profile that's currently associated with that blade. But if I'm in the habit of moving service profiles from one blade to another, maybe to balance workloads across different chassis, something that I can find out that I need to do with this tool, I want utilization that extends over a longer period of time. So the service profile utilization stays there. Even if I'm moving it from blade to blade, I can get that consistent view across the service profile. Okay, and by the way, down at the bottom here on the service profile, we see some information that's a little bit funny. The CPU and the free memory on that server. So that's information that can only come from some of those related devices in this system. And Eric, I think we ought to talk about some of those related devices now.
Wow, that was quite a demo, Ken. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here to take a breather, and I'm going to pick on you, Eric, for a minute. So Ken gave us a great demo outlining UCS and monitoring UCS specifically, but could you tell us a little bit about how other elements surrounding UCS would fit into Performance Manager?
Yeah, and Kent did a good job of really talking about some of those elements, like showing, especially at the very end, showing how, the service profiles is, the service profile view, and it really looks at that correlation. And he mentioned at the very end about, we're correlating not only the service profile to the blade, but we're correlating up to the OS layer. Because the thing about UCS, it's always a cog in a bigger machine in your data center, meaning that you just don't use UCS by itself. You're going to have UCS connected to your storage. You're going to have UCS connected to an upstream network. You're going to have applications, albeit if it's a physical workload, if it's a virtual workload running on vCenter or Hyper-V or whatever other hypervisor you might use. You need to understand how those elements are influencing your hardware decisions that you make, and that's the biggest element of, that's the nirvana that our customers have asked me and our team for, is how can I better understand my application utilization and how that affects my hardware design. And going back to what I said before, is a design is only as good as how really how it's being utilized, and you may need to make course corrections. You may have under-provisioned or over-provisioned an environment. So this dynamic capability of being able to correlate all of these different elements together is a key piece of our integrated infrastructure version, we can get an understanding of how things like what VMs are running on what hosts, what those hosts are running on in what particular cluster in a hypervisor cluster, where those clusters reside in your domain or domains. It's getting that bigger view that you can of how, as I add capacity across one or more domains, how do those things interrelate, and where do I have things running? And then start to understand of how those particular applications are affecting my utilization. I can, if I have agents running against those operating systems at the VM or physical layer, I can get an understanding of what is their utilization. If it's a virtual workload, we can also get the utilization from a CPU, memory, and network view at the vCenter or Hyper-V level, and be able to show that and then correlate that to the hardware that it's running on. You can do the same thing with physical. So, and then as well as understanding, if you think about a virtual environment, how does that relate to my storage? What faults do I have with my storage? What's the utilization with the ports I've configured in my storage layer, as well as what are, how are the things correlated from, down the stack to like what cluster is using what data center? How much capacity have we potentially over-provisioned on our data store LUNs? A lot of people do thin provisioning when they develop or when they deploy their virtual machines. So where are those thresholds, and where I can actually understand of, hey, maybe I've over-provisioned by 250% a data store, but I'm only using 20% of the capacity. When do I start to need to know that I may need to extend that LUN when I get up to the 85, 90% capacity? I mean, the customers desire that integrated solution so they can correlate all of that data between the different layers. So that's, again, they're looking at that way to be able to correlate that. And again, kind of going back to the example that I said before, think about a network. Maybe I have a set of VMs that are being our chatty Cathys, like I said before. How can I track that utilization all the way from the VM layer to the hypervisor layer, through the hardware, through the northbound connectivity for both our SAN and LAN in my integrated infrastructure, and when should I make a course correction, make a design change to better have appropriate utilized bandwidth and right-size my environment for my capacity, and not either have over or under provisioned my environment.
Thanks, Eric, for giving us that more global view of the environment. So Kent, I want to pull you back in. You gave us a great demo just a second ago on UCS Performance Manager and how that would manage UCS systems. Do you have another demo that you can share with us on how we can manage an integrated infrastructure stack?
Of course. Let's take a look. Go back and drill into that system that we were looking at for just a second. Let me do the screen sharing again. And so I'll dive back in, and we'll spend some more time in that same system we were just looking at. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is add a new portlet, doing a little bit of customization. And what I'm going to add is something called the Integrated Infrastructure Events portlet. And this is a view of, and so I've got two of those there. I've got one called something-UCS and something called FlexPod. And this gives me a view of the storage, network, and virtualization at a summary level, even if there's multiple network devices or multiple storage elements associated with that, and identify any critical errors or critical health problems, fault conditions, or thresholds that are going on right now. I've got a couple warning level events, nothing really serious that it looks like, but it gives me that quick view at the dashboard level so I can just watch that and not have to worry about something. So I can switch from one to the other. Now, let's go look and see how we build one of these integrated infrastructure by clicking on the Infrastructure tab. Okay, and I'll click down and look at my FlexPod. It's pretty simple. It's just a list of all of the components, some of the components that we added early on. I guess it's most of the components that we added on. When we first did the installation, we were adding a FlexPod, and so we've got a UCS system. We've got my Nexus systems. We've got some servers. We've got the storage, and we've got the vCenter. And we've got that both in that list view and in this graphical view that shows some of the relationships between these different things, including all the way out to all of the components of the UCS. We'll come back and look at this a little bit more in a bit. Okay, but what I want to do is jump back into that and show you what the views look like for some of these devices, because Eric was talking about having different administrators who work on different specialties work together, and a lot of times they're using different tools. So it's nice to be able to jump from, look how similar this looks to the UCS view that we just saw. A list of components down the left-hand side, some virtual components like vSANs, and some physical, and port channels for that matter, and some physical components like line cards. Any place we click, we can get information about here a port channel, so we want to know the utilization of this aggregated set of ports. Here's another port channel and its utilization, and we can see we had a little dip right as we had a bunch of new errors, so maybe somebody needs to go in and look at that in the data center and figure out what's going on there. Okay, we can drill into the individual ports that roll up to those port channels and see how they're doing. So we've got a fiber channel port and a second fiber channel port. Couple places where we can look at some different sets of data there and see where there might potentially be a bottleneck. Okay, so going back over to my infrastructure device, I want to look at something else, and let's look at the VMware, the VMware farm that I've got. Again, a very similar view with components down the left-hand side and a lot of very familiar VMware components. This one's kind of cool because up at the top in the center, it's got some of those kind of top few reports that show me which of my data stores are most heavily used, which of my my VMware hosts are most heavily used, both in memory and CPU. But I'm going to drill in and show you that we understand all the relationships in here and start at the cluster level, and we get an overall aggregate utilization at the entire cluster. So whatever cluster this is busy using 60 gigahertz of CPU right now, rolling up across all the hosts and VMs that are in that cluster. Drill in and look at the hosts in that. There are what? 16 different hosts in that system, and so we'll drill in and look at the VMs that are running on one of those hosts. Here's the 10 or so VMs that are running on that, and we can drill into the VM itself and see what the VMware view is of the performance of this system. All right, that's great to know the VMware view. We're pulling this straight out of vCenter, so it's the same kind of data that you would see in vCenter if you're drilling in there and looking at that. And we can see the CPU, memory, network usage, all the things that you need to know. Now, I want to point out over towards the right that there's some column called guest device. And that guest device is the operating system that is running in this VM. So upper left, you see a Penguin. This is a Linux server. Okay, and that Linux server has its own graphs that we gather not from the VM, but from the operating system itself. And we do that without agents. We don't put any agents on this. We're pulling this information from SNMP. We could be getting it from SSH. We do that without running an agent or needing to install or update or maintain or provision an agent. And we do that through the entire environment. Now, it's great to be able to gather the perspective both from the operating system and the VMware level. But one of the other nice things to know, and one thing that customers have told us that we're very excited about, is I want to see where this VM, what resources this operating system is using across the entire infrastructure. So we saw the VM and the vSphere, and now we see which blades and I/O cards and those aggregation pools, even the fabric interconnects, and which domain are supporting that VM right now, that operating system right now. Okay, so if we're talking about knowing where an operating system is running, how about if we say, hey, an application? Well, what is an application at the infrastructure level but just a collection of operating systems? And that's what that application group tab is. Okay, so here's a very simple application. It's just two VMs here. Okay, but let's look at what that looks like, and let's look at its dynamic view. Because what happens when we click that is that we see that this application, which is that under the device column, we see UCSPM Lin1, and that is not virtualized because I can see it's running directly on a service profile. And the one down below, UCS Central 121A, I guess this is my UCS Central application. It's got a virtual machine that's running on a host. That host is part of a particular data center and has a particular endpoint, a particular vCenter that is part of that. And if I pan over to the right in this, okay, I can see the UCS components that are supporting that. Now, besides just a visual indication, this also lets me navigate in. So I can click on a blade and go click on that and navigate directly to any one of these components and go drill deeply into this. So I'm looking at the server blade there, and down on the bottom I see the blade server utilization and the service profile utilization next to each other. So if the service profile had moved, I could look at that. The last thing I want to look at is the reporting capability. And I'll look at both a graphical report and an inventory report, a text report here. And we'll start with this bandwidth utilization report. When that shows me, it gives me a nice view over whatever time period I want. Notice the report parameters at the top, and I can scale it either vertically, I can scale it on a linear scale it is now, or make it a logarithmic scale. Sometimes that's useful. And I get a view here of the per chassis, I/O module, and fabric extenders on a per domain basis. So I can quickly compare from one domain to another and see what's going on. Now, hardware inventory is always great fun, and a UCS domain is a very complex beast. So if the accounting department comes to you and says, hey, we need to figure out everything we've got going on there, or you just needed to know if there was some additional capacity places where you could add additional capacity, wondering what CPUs you were running on a particular place, you can come in here and see that for each of your domains and all of the components that are in the system and get a really good idea of what's going on. So, Jeff, that's a very fast view through all of these other components.
Thanks, Kent. That was a great overview into the integrated infrastructure environment and some of those other elements. So, Vish, you've been with us for a while now, and I want to come back to you. So for those folks on the call today or listening to the recording who are interested in a UCS Performance Manager, first off, what's the availability of the product? And if they're interested in learning more, what is the recommended next steps for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeff, the UCS Performance Manager is generally available today. It's on Cisco.com under the UCS product family. So it's available for ordering also on the system. So if you want if anybody wants to read more about or learn more about UCS Performance Manager, please visit cisco.com/go/UCS perf MGR, UCS perf MGR. You can do that, or you can have customers or partners could reach out to respective Cisco sales representatives or partners supporting you, and they will be able to provide you additional information on UCS Performance Manager. You can always reach out to us if you have more questions, and we'll be happy to help.
Thanks, Vish. And actually, that's a great segue, and to remind our viewers that this particular Tech Talk will be posted on our UCS community site at communities.cisco.com/UCS. So this and all of our previous Tech Talks are posted there, as well as more information and tools on UCS products and solutions. So with that, I want to thank the panel, Eric, Kent, Vish. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. And to the audience, I definitely appreciate your attendance and participation, asking questions in the background. We'll see you at a future installment of the UCS Tech Talk, and thank you. Bye for now.